Coogs House, the Houston Cougars thought they had their man at offensive coordinator, but things have changed. Like what?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can't stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can place on Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We're making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you found us on YouTube, welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's so good to see you again. Obviously, we took 24 hours or so off. We'll talk more about that in a second, but thank you. Hit subscribe to help us get to the next 250 subscriber mark. That one is going to be 2,000. It's a pretty big one. We're doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers. Again, subscribe, help us get there. Like and comment on the videos to let us know in the contest. If after all of this conversation, you're like, I just don't know what to talk about. There's a lot of football talk. It's a big basketball week. I don't know what to say. Just tell us in the comments down below what your first job was. All right, so we are going to talk about a couple different things today. I want to talk some about this coaching staff as it's coming together. Pretty big news on that, I guess, on Tuesday. Kind of a little bit of a shakeup in what we thought was coming. Then I want to talk some about what the potential options to get out of that situation are. And then last but not least, there's some roster shakeup as well, with a couple of big and important folks hitting that transfer portal. Now, obviously, if you're listening to us on Wednesday, you'll remember there was no episode on Tuesday. I want to say first my apologies for that, and thank you for sticking with us. If you've been following the show for a long time at this point, you know I have a 6-month-old at home, and I found out the hard way that apparently even without actually having the pink eye part of pink eye themselves, they can apparently have and then pass on pink eye. That's frankly why I have glasses on tonight. And excuse me. And frankly, I just could not stare at a screen to do the research, much less record on Monday. So thank you for bearing with us for a day off. We're going to make it up to you some way. I promise. Lots of basketball to get into this week. But again, thank you for sticking with us, even if we had to take a day off. Now, I want to talk about the big news of the day on Tuesday for the Houston Cougars, and that was the exodus of an offense. Going to be an exodus if he never came of an offense coordinator. Now, if you were following us over the weekend, we assumed, based on reports from over the weekend, that Slade Nagle would be the offensive coordinator for Houston. He was the offensive coordinator for Tulane last year. And for what it's worth, Tulane fans seemed kind of eager to see him out the door. Tulane's had a different offensive coordinator the last 3 years consecutively. And I think Nagle was kind of the worst of the three, if you ask a Tulane fan. Certainly the least effective offensively as far as statistics go. I would also point out he did not have Tajay Spears like they had in 2022. So obviously it's going to be a little bit different. Whatever that is, I will say that I think it was a little bit shaking in the sense that it felt like a sure thing, not necessarily in the sense that Houston's worse off as long as they make the right hire. Anyway, Slade Nagle, I think it's worth pointing out, I think there's two ways to report this. One, you're saying that he is turning this down. So I think that's like the overarching thing is he did not want to come to Houston. So this part wants to say screw him anyway. But what I will say is he has kind of proven himself as a Louisiana guy. He's a McNeese State alum. He coached at Northwestern State, LSU, McNeese, and Tulane. He also has Central Arkansas and Dodge City on his resume. So I mean, say he's never been anywhere else, but he's a very, very, very Louisiana guy. And I read this as he's looking to stay in Louisiana if possible. It sounds like there was a Tulane report, not from the Tulane itself, but from like the bloggers of sorts, that Tulane is not going to take any coach that has taken a Houston offer back. And so I think that felt very directed at Slade Nagle, but whatever the case may be, I'd imagine that the two things you see coming out of this are that he wants to either stay at Tulane and specifically be an offensive coordinator as they move into their next stage of the coaching I guess, coaching race. They're pulling in guys from Troy and things like that. And if they don't pull an offensive coordinator from Troy as well, then maybe they want to keep Slade Nagle. I could also see if he was like, you know what, I've got so much family in Louisiana. I'm a Louisiana guy. How can I find a way to stay in this state as opposed to trying to commute my family back and forth between Louisiana and Houston? Now, Houston's obviously not super far. Part of the benefit of having Willie Fritz and staff as they understand the region of the Bayou so well. But I do think it's worth pointing out that as a Louisiana guy, I'm leaning more into that one, that he just, at the end of the day, could not make the jump work. But as far as the official report goes, it reads that Slade Nagle, Willie Fritz's offensive coordinator this season at Tulane, will not join him at Houston after all. Multiple outlets reported on Tuesday that Nagle has decided to pursue other options after previously agreeing to do so. He signed with Clemson in high school, but finished college career at McNeese State. Started coaching at Northwestern State. Was a tight ends coach his first 7 seasons at Tulane. Rose to associate head coach, offensive coordinator, and quarterbacks coach as recently as last season. So he was the OC in the 2022 season. Season before that, he was the associate HC and things like that. I think Houston's okay here as long as they get the hire correct. Now, obviously, each and every hire is going to be really important from here on out. But as we looked at over the weekend, the defensive staff, whether it's Sheil Wood or Gerald Chapman, James Ross, we have Christian Young is now our DB's coach. We hired on Tuesday. Each of those guys, with the exception of Christian Young, has had stops where they've had major leadership roles. And we think, I made the argument from Monday's show that that's a good sign for the greater good of the Houston Cougar program, because each of those guys had leadership roles that have gotten them to this point, whether it's what is a DC. Chapman has been a DC at Colorado. James Ross has been the DC at Hope College fairly recently. So each of those guys has experience being in charge of a defense, and that means that they should all have different, not just levels of leadership within their own position rooms, but also like bringing a various amount of experiences and different experiences to the table. On offense, we don't quite have that without Slade Nagle. Derek Sherman, the wide receivers coach, was previously the running back coach at Tulane. He was an offensive coordinator at Georgia Southern, but his COVID season there got canceled, so he didn't actually get to call any plays, obviously, and then ultimately got moved to Tulane. And then the offensive line group, we obviously are keeping Emmanuel Gavi. And so while he's been a run game coordinator, we're still looking on like his far past him more about his offensive coordinating abilities. I have some thoughts in the second segment as to who I think the Houston Cougars could look at, because it appears to be that Willie Fritz really likes his guys. I think that's the biggest thing that was a positive about Slade Nagle potentially coming in, is Fritz is building this with his people, and if he trusts Nagle at Tulane, we can assume he would have trusted him and given him the keys to the car here, and that's good enough for me, and I think it should be good enough for most people. But now Houston's got to hire a new offensive coordinator, and if you're looking to make a key hire for your small business, or you're looking to do something in the hiring world, you go to linkedin.com/lockedoncollege, because whenever you're hiring for your small business, you want to make sure that you have the top tier candidates for every interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs to find the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. So if you're like Houston, you have to find some offense coordination between now and signing day, help pull in recruits, you go to linkedinjobs.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. So I said that there's a handful of names here that I think you could see the Houston Cougars pull in, that would make some sense, that have ties to Willie Fritz. Now, one guy I think is an interesting candidate is Will Hall. Will Hall has been an offensive coordinator for Fritz earlier in his Tulane tenure. He's currently the head coach at Southern Miss. Southern Miss has not been notably good while he's been there. 13-24 in his 3 seasons there. Again, not spectacular. He was also, for what it's worth, the associate head coach and tight ends coach at Louisiana Lafayette. He was the OC there in 2017. Both of those seasons, they had 400 yards per game, right? So he can coach an offense. He's just run into other issues at Southern Miss. And frankly, there's some guys that just are more coordinator based than head coaching based. Will Hall has been the head coach at West Georgia, West Alabama. I guess he was also the OC, it looked like on his resume, before at Western Alabama. He's run effective offenses wherever he's been. And I think he's a name that, with his ties to Fritz from Tulane a few years back, you could see come on through. Doug Roose, I think, is the most long-lasting name you see tied to Coach Fritz. Doug Roose was the offensive coordinator at Sam Houston State when Fritz was the head coach there. He was the offensive coordinator at Georgia Southern twice, once with Fritz and once after Fritz. He's currently just an offensive analyst at Southern Alabama. So I say that to say that I think he'd be an easy get. He's coached with Fritz before. They've had effective offenses before, had success at the FCS level before at Sam Houston State. Well, as its offensive coordinator at Georgia Southern, they also put up a lot of yards per game. So I say that to say I think that, honestly, that's worth looking at. Can you pull him out of Southern Alabama? Yes, the same offense put up a lot of points on Oklahoma State with Major Applewhite there as well, but there's a connection I guess we got to make with Houston every time his name comes up. But I think that, frankly, it'll be a nice step up in the world, and that he and Fritz work well together. I think two names, I should say, that I think would be hard to get but are worth looking into are Del McGee, who is currently the running backs and run game coordinator at Georgia. If you get him a full offensive coordinator role, would he move from Georgia to Houston? I think it's worth investigating. He coached the running backs at Georgia Southern and was the associate head coach and interim head coach once Fritz left, all at Georgia Southern. He kept the running back and associate head coach role after Fritz left. He then went directly from there to University of Georgia. Obviously, has had a ton of success there. They lost one game in 3 years and had an electric offense and a power run game with him being the run game coordinator. Could be a fun hire if you can pull him from Georgia. The big thing there is, can you really get him to join Fritz again? And can you pull him out of Georgia, a power blue blood program, with the promotion going from run game coordinator to offensive coordinator? Worth looking into. Again, that's Del McGee. The other guy that'd be a stretch here, but I think you've got to at least give a phone call to, is Alex Atkins. Alex Atkins is the offensive coordinator at Florida State. He has not had that job very long. He was the offensive line coach with Willie Fritz at Georgia Southern, the associate head coach and offensive line coach as well there, and then eventually became the associate head coach, run game coordinator, and offensive line coach at Tulane. He left for the OC gig at Charlotte when he left Tulane. So, obviously looking for promotion there. He left the Charlotte gig to be the OC at Florida State. Florida State being a program that frankly got screwed out of the college football playoff this year, had a lot of success. Obviously, it's a hard job to get him to move over from, but he's got a ton of success. He knows Willie, and they work well together. I think it's a call that you got to make if you're the University of Houston. At least see what the dollar amount would be to get him to move from Florida to Houston. Now, he's not a Florida or Texas guy by nature. He really looks like his background, as far as his roots go, more the Tennessee area. But frankly, that's not a bad recruit ground to be tied to either. And we have a lot of guys with Texas ties on the staff. Not bad to expand it, in my opinion, out that way. And I think he seems very relatable. His Florida State offensive guys have a ton of good things to say about him when you look through their commentary on on Twitter and things like that. People really, really like Alex Atkins. He's a very likable person. And so I think that would go a long way as well. Again, tough call because I don't think it's going to be easy to pull him over, but could you find some cash to get him over here, connect him with Willie, and promise all the big things that Houston, we both know, can be? I think it's worth giving the phone call. The far more likely guy that I think is worth looking at here is actually a guy that would be coming from Tulane last year, but not the offensive coordinator, and that's James Vota. Now, James Vota is the quarterback coach from Tulane last year, but he was the Central Missouri head coach from 2010 to 2021. While he was there, they went 86-43, but the big thing that kind of ended his career there was They had a no year for COVID because the level of football they were in did not play during the COVID pandemic year. And then they went 4-7 after that. They put up great offensive numbers and had a really strong 2017 to 19, but could not recover from the pandemic as a program. And he jumped ship to go to Tulane. He coached the quarterbacks while he was there. Obviously, we saw at firsthand at Houston with the third string quarterback, with him coaching them. They did pretty darn well. But I think his more important time to look at for Houston would actually be even further back when he was the offensive coordinator at UCLA from 2004 to 2006. He had 400 plus yards of offense per game in 2 out of his 3 seasons. He coached a offensive run game based on a guy named Maurice Jones-Drew. If you are too young to know who that is, I really recommend after this episode is over to go look up Maurice Jones-Drew highlights online. Mojo Drew would be the kind of running back that would make Houston fans go nuts. He's a little bit shorter, a little bit squattier, but strong, fast, explosive, and frankly, the kinds of ways they got him down. I mean, when he was at UCLA, everyone in America knew he was getting the rock. I mean, he was that kind of running back. And they, again, still put up over 400 yards of offense with that limitation. I think that's a guy worth calling. And he knows Willie Fritz. Before that, even, so he gets to UCLA in 2004. Before that, he was at Northwest Missouri State. While he was there, they won 2 Division II championships. I think it's to point out he was a part of the staff that in '94 went 0-11, but by '98 is winning the entire Division II championship. Right, that 4-year turnaround, he saw it happen. He was the offensive coordinator for it happen, and they put up a lot of points in his time there. I think that's a guy that you've seen turn around that program. You've seen him work with a very put up numbers with a very limited offense at UCLA, and he had a very good head coaching career at Central Missouri. I think all of those things make Jens Vota the kind of guy that has connections to Fritz, or with his connection to Fritz, makes him a need to go higher. Now, I know people are going to be like, but Parker, these are not the sexy names. These are not Sharon Moore from Michigan, who's going to get a head coaching job somewhere. I don't know why if he'd be taking a coordinator job. These are not Cliff Kingsbury. You're not pulling Cliff Kingsbury out of UCLA, out of USC with these, right? All those I can see people nodding now that I am advocating for people that have connections to Fritz instead of people with sexy names. And I am. They're saying that because that's right. I think that's the way to go, because through every hire he's made thus far, and frankly, every non-retention he's made thus far, Willie Fritz has given us reason to believe he's going to trust people he knows. Now, I think they gave the keys to the right guy. I think if you give the keys to your program to a football coach, you need to let him drive the car. You can't treat it like a student driver. And if he's shown us who he is and that he wants to bring in guys he's familiar with, I think we have to trust him with that. We've seen him turn on build programs. He knows what he's looking for. If that is Jim Svoboda, because he's seen that Svoboda has rebuilt a program, you got to give him a chance. If it's Will Hall, because he's seen Will Hall do it as a coordinator before, and times at Georgia Southern and stuff like that, or Tulane, and stuff like that, then you got to give it to him. If it's Doug Roose, because he's like, hey, we did this thing at Sam Houston State. He knows Texas as well as anyone I've ever worked with. We got to pull in Roose. You got to let him pull in Roose. You got to let him do whatever he says is what the program needs, because, frankly, you turn this thing over to him. You got to trust him as a program. We got to trust him as a fan base. I'm looking to see what pops up as potential names, but I think it's worth looking through that list of resume names because they've all got ties to Fritz. Now, if you're like me and you're like, you know what, I can't wait till the weekend for Houston to win against A&M. I got to find some other ways to win this week. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to find ways to win this football season, because as the weather gets colder, their NFL offers are staying hot. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet at FanDuel. That's $150 if your team wins. Now, our team, the Houston Texans, are a 2.5-point dog this weekend against the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, that's somewhat impacted by CJ Stroud being out, likely out with a concussion injury. Don't get me started on how that was, probably a rough and pass call that did not get called, but I digress. The money line for Houston is at plus 118. Now, there's a lot of pride in the line for Houston Texans this weekend, Davis Mills included. And frankly, I think Tennessee looks vulnerable. Tennessee's coming off an exciting weekend of their own. They're riding high, and screw them with those weather uniforms. I'm taking Houston. I'm taking them at the points. I'm taking them on the money line. I'm telling you, if you put $5 down on that money line right now and they win, you get $150 back at FanDuel and bonus bet. So if it's FanDuel.com/locked on and kick off this NFL season, FanDuel, official part of the NFL. All right, the last thing I want to talk about today is that Houston did have some unfortunate transfer news in the last couple of days that we have not yet talked about. And so I was going to kind of break down how each of these goes. The least impactful in the current roster, because he didn't really play much last season, although I think he was going to play a lot in the upcoming seasons, is Justin Benton. Now, Justin Benton was a highly touted recruit out of Georgia. That was undoubtedly connected with Doug Belk, because Doug Belk does such a great job recruiting that region of the country. He was committed to the University of Houston early on in the recruiting process, actually. Was a freshman last year, played a little bit, but not a lot. Defensive lineman, 6 foot, listed at 280. I thought he looked close to 3, but a strong, stout guy. He has sort of his name in the transfer portal and officially filed paperwork. He is on the way out. I think Justin's going to be a great football player. I wish he'd been at Houston. I guess technically it's not over yet for him at Houston if he wanted to come back, but it looks like he is out. Speaking of filing official paperwork, as mentioned last week, Matthew Golden is out the door. He did put his paperwork into the transfer portal officially. He has officially gone. I'm one to wish him the best. I think the guy's got a crazy bright future in football. I understand, as we heard before, that he is the kind of guy that through NIL dollars that they throw at wide receivers and stuff like that, he could be looking at big time 6 figures, if not 500,000 type deals in NIL. And I cannot fault the kid for taking that kind of cash. He has not said that that's the reason he wants to leave. That's totally me projecting what I would be doing if I were in that situation. Obviously, he has said it's much more about exploring options. I will say, for what it's worth, he was very much a Dana guy. He was very much a Dana kind of recruit. And so I could see how, with a coaching staff change, this is somewhat natural. This is somewhat just a normal changing of the seasons, changing of the leaves kind of thing for Matthew Golden. Obviously, it stinks to see a guy that went to Klein Kane, actually, leave the Houston Cougars. But as much fun as it was to watch him play in Houston the last couple of years, I have to say, I get it. And as many people have pointed out online, if in the grand scheme of things, the shakeup of the program does get us back on the right direction in the long term, unfortunately, we're going to lose talented athletes in the short term to get the thing turned back around. Wishing Matthew Golden all the best in the next status, in the next venture for him. But he has filed his paperwork. It does look like he will be leaving Houston. Cristobal says Texas. Part of me really does not want that to happen. I understand he's got to follow it, but part of me really doesn't want that to happen. The big gut punches on Tuesday, though, were a couple of big guys. Chidozie Nwankwo and Jamari Caldwell. I would argue the best 2 defensive linemen not eligible for the NFL draft this spring on the Houston Cougar football team last year are both in the transfer portal. Now, Nwankwo missed some time hurt this season, is listed at 6 foot 285. I bet he probably comes in closer to 5'11", 280. What I have to say about Nwankwo is he's a classic, it ain't the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog kind of defensive lineman. Houston's going to miss him. If he really does leave, and I guess technically in the transfer portal, he does not have to leave. He could say, actually, I'm coming back. But he will be missed. He's a nose tackle. Doesn't have a lot of sexy stats because nose tackles don't. But if you watch the defense, it's almost like in basketball, you have on and off splits, or in baseball, you have WAR, wins above replacement. If you look at the time of running yards that he's not on the field versus when he is on the field, the impact he has on the football game, and absorbing double teams, and fighting to keep the line of scrimmage at the line of scrimmage, and fighting off those double teams and forcing the ball to go in certain directions. He is incredibly talented. I've said before that I worry about his pro prospects because of his size. I know that, especially at a nose tackle position, see a lot of NFL guys get infatuated with measurables. He does not have the measurables. He has all of the immeasurables. And I really think he's got a bright future in football. Seeing him in the transfer portal really, really did punch me in the stomach. I remember I got the tweet. I was in the car at the time, not driving, obviously, not driving. But I was in the car at the time. I got the tweet. It's like, God, like I like audibly sighed. And my wife was like, "What? What's going on?" I was like, "Don Wonko was leaving," and she like kind of didn't know what I was talking about. She pays attention, not a lot of attention. And so I was like, "He's really good. That's all you need. He's really good." And then shortly thereafter, Jamari Caldwell, who is also really good, entered the transfer portal. Jamari, I think on the inverse of Chidozie, does have the measurables. He's 6'4", listed at 325 on some places. He's a big, big dude. And I think the interesting thing in looking at him is I think people see him as an interior D lineman. He's proven this year he can play some on the edge as well. Super loyal to Brian Early with Houston changing staffs. I'm sure he's looking to see where can he find some new relationship with somebody. Again, he doesn't have to leave technically as a transfer portal guy, but we'll see where he ends up. Houston's going to miss him a lot. He was one of the more versatile guys on the offensive line, and certainly the most versatile guy, or the defensive line, sorry, and the most versatile guy coming back on the defensive line with Nelson Caesar going off the NFL and things like that. Really, really needed Jamari Caldwell on next year's defense line to help transition Sack Avenue from one regime to the next. That is not happening. It doesn't look like. I guess they could all come back. The transfer portal does not have to mean that you are gone, just that you are dabbling and listening and those kinds of things. But man, oh man, do I want to see. I wish that I didn't have to see those guys play in other uniforms. Really don't want to see them play in other teams in the Big 12. So Chidozie, Jamari, Justin, Matthew, if you're leaving, I bid you adieu. Hope the best. Hope big time successes. Hope you get to play on Sundays. Man, oh man, I don't want to see you in the Big 12. I just don't. It's kind of hard to see. Thank you all so much for tuning in today to Locked On Cougs, making us your first listen of the day each and every day. Appreciate the everydayers a lot here. All kinds of plans. We talk about basketball. I know things got thrown off a little bit with some big football news on Tuesday to talk about today. But Thursday and Friday will be basketball all day long, I promise. Unless something crazy happens in football, I guess. And then Saturday, I'm actually thinking we need to bring back Cougars After Dark, a live show at nighttime. Cougars After Dark, get after dark, so it'll be at night to kind of talk about the day of college basketball because Houston plays one of the more marquee games on Saturday as they, I want to say host, but I guess it's technically at the Toyota Center, Texas A&M in a top 25 matchup. Kind of a game Houston needs to win because of the strength of schedule in non-conference. We'll talk about that more on Thursday and Friday, but regardless, after the game is over, we're going to watch the rest of the day in college basketball and talk about Cougars After Dark and all things Houston Cougar basketball Saturday night. We're looking like a 9:30, 10 o'clock start. So make sure you subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live, and tune into that as well. Again, thank you all so much for being Locked On Cougs, your first listen of the day. For a second listen, I'm going to recommend Locked On Big 12. Drake is doing a great job of covering all of the kind of off-season, kind of bowl season things happening across the conference. Make sure you go check that out as well. Locked On Cougs is proud of Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team, our Cougs, every day. Go Cougs.